Have you ever noticed that a narcissist doesn't actually suffer when you leave them, but when you change after leaving them? For them, the breakup itself isn't the real disaster. The true catastrophe is that you become someone they can no longer mold, control, or define. In the narcissist's inner world, a relationship was never about two equal souls walking side by side. It was more like a carefully staged play. They wrote the script, they directed the scenes, and you were only the supporting actor reciting lines they had already written. What they called love was never connection. It was submission. They didn't love you as a free individual. They only loved you as long as you could be manipulated, made to feel guilty, and pulled back into orbit to keep them at the center of your universe. But then something happened they never expected. After all the pain, you didn't collapse. You didn't beg. You didn't wait for redemption through their empty apologies. You stopped. It was a quiet yet decisive stop, like stepping out of an old stale room without ever looking back. And from that moment, you began to transform. You were no longer the person losing sleep over unanswered messages, no longer the one asking, "Why did they change?" or "Why am I not enough?" You realized the problem was never your worth, it was in letting someone else define it. As those old questions faded, a new strength began to rise. Calmness, clarity, the deep knowing that you don't need to react in order to prove yourself. And that silence is what drives the narcissist into panic, because once you stop reflecting them, the mirror they lived through shatters. They lose their power, their script, their role as director in your life. And the thing they will never forgive you for isn't that you walked away, but that you found your true self. You became the person they could never create, a free, strong version of yourself, no longer revolving around their gaze. And to the narcissist, that feels like the ultimate betrayal, because you shattered their greatest illusion, that you would forever remain trapped in the role they had written for you. In common understanding, love is a relationship built on trust, empathy, and mutual respect. But for the narcissist, love is never defined by sharing. For them, love equals power. They're not seeking a genuine connection between two equal souls. They're searching for a living mirror to reflect their inflated yet fragile ego. When someone falls into a relationship with a narcissist, the beginning often feels intoxicating. They're flattered, idealized, and made to believe they are the one and only. Psychology calls this phase love bombing. But this love isn't meant to nurture, it's meant to control. The narcissist wants the power to dictate your emotions. When you're happy, they feel powerful. When you're anxious, they feel important. When you cry, they feel victorious. They don't care about your authentic self, only about your reactions, because those reactions are the fuel that sustains their fragile identity. Freud called this narcissistic supply, a form of emotional energy the narcissist depends on to survive. Carl Jung took it a step deeper. The narcissist lives in the persona, the mask they wear for the world, while beneath that mask lies a shadow filled with insecurity, shame, and the terror of abandonment. They never want to face that shadow, and so they need another person to act as the container to keep them from confronting the truth about themselves. A relationship with a narcissist, then, is like stepping into a play that has already been scripted. They are the director, and you are the supporting actor. Every gesture, every emotion of yours is manipulated to reinforce their starring role. If you're too joyful, they'll cut you down to remind you who holds the power. If you're too broken, they'll sprinkle just enough sweetness to keep you hanging on. And so you find yourself trapped in an invisible glass box. You can see the outside world, but every movement you make is being controlled from within. The cost of living in that box is the erosion of your trust in yourself. Slowly you start to ask, am I too sensitive? Am I the selfish one? Is everything really my fault? This is gaslighting, psychological manipulation designed to make the victim doubt their own reality. Once you begin to believe you are unworthy, that you need them in order to survive, their power game has won completely. And yet, here lies the paradox. While you shrink smaller and smaller in your own eyes, Inside of them grows only emptiness, because the narcissist only exists when someone reflects them. Their greatest fear is the day you stop reflecting back that image. In that moment, they no longer know who they are, because their entire sense of self has only ever been sustained through the gaze of others. Carl Jung once warned, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." In a relationship with a narcissist, you unknowingly become the mirror that shields them from their unconscious. They cling to you to preserve the illusion of power, to cover their insecurity, to avoid their inner darkness. But that shadow never disappears. It only waits for the moment when no one is left to reflect it, and then it resurfaces. And that is the essence of the invisible power game the narcissist imposes. They don't love you as a real human being. They love the role you've been forced to play. They love control. They love submission. They love watching you lose sleep, agonize, and blame yourself. You think you're living inside love, but in truth you are trapped inside an endless play. And when you finally choose to step out, when you drop the script, the entire stage they built begins to collapse. In every relationship with a narcissist, there's always a repeating cycle. It begins with the idealization stage, where you're placed on a pedestal, adored, promised the world. Next comes the devaluation stage, where you're criticized, ignored, punished with silence. Then, when you threaten to leave or show too much pain, they rescue you with just enough fake affection to keep you from walking away. And the circle spins again and again, turning you into a hostage of your own uncontrollable emotions. But eventually, that cycle snaps. And when it snaps, the entire psychological world of the narcissist begins to shake. The turning point rarely arrives through an explosive confrontation. It's not usually marked by a fiery argument or a dramatic breakup. Instead, it comes through something that seems small: stopping. You stop texting endlessly for answers. You stop staying up all night analyzing every word they said. You stop begging, stop crying, stop apologizing for things that were never your fault. You simply stop, quietly but decisively, as if you step out of a suffocating room with no need to ever look back. This stopping is not the same as fighting them. As long as you're still fighting, you're still in the game. As long as you're arguing, demanding fairness, you're still giving them their most precious resource, your reaction. But when you truly stop reacting, stop trying, stop hoping, the cycle they've relied on for so long finally breaks. That's when the narcissist falls into panic. In psychology, this is often explained through the concept of trauma bonding, the attachment created through alternating cycles of reward and punishment. Like a gambler hooked on a slot machine, you keep betting not because you always win, but because you win just enough to keep hoping for the next big payoff. With the narcissist, every hug after days of silence, every apology after a rage episode, is that small win that keeps you hooked. But once you see the truth, that there's nothing left but the endless repetition of pain, the bond starts to dissolve. When you change, the narcissist doesn't just lose a lover, a partner, or a companion. They lose a role that has defined their entire sense of existence. Often they react with explosive anger, because rage is their fastest attempt to reclaim lost power. But the more frightening part is what comes after. The quiet panic, when they realize they no longer have the tools to pull you back into the old cycle. To them, you suddenly become someone else. No more desperate texts begging for attention, no more rushing to them the moment they call, no more tearful nights pleading with them not to leave. Instead, you appear quiet, calm, almost untouchable. To them, that isn't liberation, it's betrayal, because you've broken out of the script they believed they could control forever. When the cycle is broken, it's not only the narcissist who panics, you go through a crisis too. The silence, the stopping, doesn't always begin from freedom. It often begins from exhaustion. You're too tired to cry anymore, too tired to analyze, too tired to hope. But in that exhaustion, another door opens. You realize your worth doesn't depend on someone else. This is the first step of what Carl Jung called individuation, the journey of becoming yourself. You start listening to your inner voice instead of reacting to outside noise. You learn to set boundaries. You learn to say no without attaching an apology. You learn to be silent not as punishment but as protection of your own peace. Each of these small steps is a revolutionary shift in the structure of the cycle, and for the narcissist, it's the greatest threat of all. This new silence carries immense power. It isn't the silence of sulking, nor the silence that waits for a reaction. It's an existential silence, the silence of seeing the game for what it is and choosing not to play anymore. For the narcissist, this is the hardest blow because they have never known how to face themselves when there's no one left to mirror them. From a philosophical perspective, this change echoes the wisdom of Stoics like Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius. Happiness doesn't come from controlling others, but from mastering yourself. When you withdraw your energy from the narcissist and turn it inward, you're doing something they can never do, and that makes them feel utterly betrayed, because it exposes their deepest helplessness. They cannot sustain their ego without an external source. Your change, then, is not just a personal turning point. It's a mirror reflecting their falsehood. Every time they see your calm, they're forced to confront the chaos they can't hide. Every time you stay silent, the emptiness inside them grows louder. And every time you live on without mentioning them, they understand that the power they once worshipped was nothing but an illusion. When the cycle breaks, the narcissist rarely gives up easily. They often try to return, sometimes in more subtle disguises. They may reappear with a new image, claiming they've changed, that they've gone to therapy, that they've read books, that they finally understand you. But their motive hasn't changed. They're not coming back for you. They're coming back for the supply you once gave them. This is a dangerous stage because if you're not yet steady, you could be pulled back into the old cycle in a new form. But the difference this time is you. Once you've truly changed, you're no longer swayed by promises. You'll no longer wait for recognition from someone who never saw you as an independent human being. And when you refuse to step back into the cycle, you officially break the script they built. Breaking the cycle has a profound meaning. It not only frees you from the narcissist, but also from the shadow within you, the part that once believed love meant endurance, that your worth depended on pleasing others. When you change, you're no longer acting in their script, but you're also no longer controlled by the unconscious script inside your own mind. You begin to rewrite your story, and this time, you are the true author. When the familiar cycle breaks, the narcissist doesn't just lose a companion, they lose a role that once defined their entire sense of existence. To them, you were never an independent human being. You were a supply source, a reservoir of emotional energy they could exploit. When that supply dries up, when you become someone they can no longer control, their reaction is rarely quiet acceptance. On the contrary, it's a storm of conflicting responses. Panic, anger, manipulation, and despair colliding into one. The first thing that often shows up is confusion. The narcissist is used to a script where they push a button and you instantly react, a cold message, a long silence, a judgmental stare. These were once reliable tools to spark fear or guilt in you, but now those tools don't work anymore. They send a message, you don't reply. They act angry, you remain calm. They disappear on purpose and you don't go looking. In their inner world, that is a terrifying collapse of order. From confusion, they quickly shift into anger. Rage is the narcissist's attempt to reclaim power. If they once controlled your emotions, now they feel betrayed by your audacity to escape that role. They may lash out with insults, accusations, even fabrications designed to tear you down. None of this is truly about who you are. It serves only one purpose: to make you react, because the moment you react, the cycle revives and they feel alive again. When rage no longer works, they move into something more dangerous: manipulation through false transformation. This is when the narcissist puts on a new mask, a so-called upgraded version of themselves. Suddenly, they may act gentle, admit their faults, even claim they've gone to therapy or read books on healing. They might send you quotes about love, regret, and growth. They might write the long, heartfelt apology you once wished for, but behind every word lies a single motive: to pull you back into being their supply. This false change can leave you conflicted. A part of you, the part that endured, that once longed for genuine remorse, may stir with hope. You may wonder, is this time real? Have they finally changed? But the difference now is not in them, it's in you. Once you've truly changed, you recognize those apologies for what they are, just another script, rewritten to fit your lack of reaction. In some cases, when both rage and manipulation fail, the narcissist begins rewriting the story. Since they can no longer control you, they try to control how others see you. This is when they cast you as the villain in their narrative. They may tell friends you're cold, selfish, even cruel. They may claim you abandoned them when they needed you most, or that you never truly understood them. For them, rewriting the story isn't really about attacking you directly. It's about shielding their fragile ego from the truth, that they lost control. The irony, however, is that in all these reactions, confusion, rage, manipulation, smear campaigns, what terrifies them most is your calm. Because your calm proves their power has no effect anymore. When you no longer need explanations, no longer need apologies, no longer need closure, you've stepped out of the game they believed they would always win. Another common reaction is the dangerous return. The narcissist may leave, but after a while they come back with more subtle strategies. They might reappear as an old friend, as someone more mature, or as a wounded soul seeking comfort. They know your compassion and they prey on it. This is when, if you're not grounded enough, you could easily be pulled back into the old cycle under a new disguise. But when you've truly become the new version of yourself, you see clearly, they're not coming back for love. They're coming back to survive through you. The final reaction, and the narcissist's deepest fear, is despair. When every tactic fails, they are forced to face a truth they've avoided their entire life. They are not as powerful as they believed. Their existence is no longer confirmed through your gaze. And for a fragile ego fed only by illusions, that truth feels like a sentence. It's vital to understand that none of these reactions come from real love. They come from fear. The fear of losing control. The narcissist doesn't resent you for becoming worse. They resent you for becoming better, stronger, freer, no longer bound by the script they wrote. That transformation is the greatest threat because it exposes the reality that their power was never real. When you step out of the cycle and hold your ground, every reaction, manipulation, smear campaigns, ultimately leads to one outcome. They are forced to face themselves. And that truth is never pleasant. It reveals emptiness, insecurity, and the fear of abandonment that has haunted them all along. The saddest yet most liberating part is this: you don't need to defeat them. You don't need to prove them wrong. The truth is already proven by the way you live. Every calm step you take declares the power game is over. Every free breath you draw testifies they no longer control you. And that, more than any argument or revenge, is the fatal blow to the narcissist's ego. The quiet presence of a new self they could never create. Perhaps you never imagined silence could carry such immense power. In a noisy world where the narcissist thrives on drama, on emotional storms, on explosive reactions, your silence is the one thing they cannot endure. Silence is no longer a tactic of manipulation the way they once wielded it against you. Silence now becomes a natural state of maturity, a sign that you've stepped out of the game they tried to trap you in, and that turns silence into the most powerful weapon you possess, even though you never intended it as an attack. When you were still caught in the cycle, you experienced the narcissist's silence as punishment. They disappeared. No messages, no explanations, no closure. They knew the void would drive you mad, that you'd blame yourself, that you'd scramble to fill the emptiness with apologies, explanations, or self-debasement just to win them back. Their silence was a tool to keep you in a state of constant anxiety. But now, when silence is your choice, its meaning transforms completely. Your silence no longer comes from fear, it comes from freedom. It's not a reaction to them, it's your decision for inner peace, and precisely because of that it becomes something they cannot accept. For every moment you remain silent, they are forced to confront the void within themselves. No one left to reflect their inflated ego, no one trembling at their anger, no one crying, begging, or demanding, only stillness. And in that stillness the truth appears. They were never more than an empty self, dependent on others to feel alive. From a philosophical view, your silence mirrors what the Stoics described. When you learn to distinguish between what you can control and what you cannot, you find freedom. You are no longer pulled into emotional storms created by someone else. You know you cannot change them, cannot heal them, and do not need to prove yourself to them. You can only master your own responses, and silence is the proof that you finally have. To the narcissist, this feels like betrayal. Their entire life has been built on the belief that they can control others. They live in layers of masks, hiding behind a glittering persona while burying their shadow. Filled with shame, insecurity, and fear, your silence cracks those masks. With nowhere left to hide, the shadow they've buried all their life shines back at them, and that is the terror they've always run from. You'll often notice shifts in their behavior as your silence stretches on. At first, they try to provoke you with anger, venom, or lies. When that fails, they may beg, plead, or fake remorse. If that too fails, they may smear your image in the eyes of others. But all these attempts share one goal: to shatter your silence. Because silence means they've lost control. What the narcissist will never say, but always feel deeply, is that your freedom is the harshest accusation against them. You don't need to shout, to expose, to prove anything. Simply by living peacefully, authentically, you demonstrate that everything they imposed on you was a lie. Your silence is like a transparent mirror. It doesn't speak, but it reflects a truth they cannot deny. There's a cruel paradox for them. They can endure distance, survive a breakup, even handle the fact that you no longer love them. But what they cannot endure is seeing you thrive without them, because that shatters their grandest illusion, that they were the center, that you would forever be bound, that only they could dictate how the story ends. When you choose silence and freedom, you strip them of their last power, the power to script your life. From a therapeutic perspective, this silence is a sign of healing. You're no longer trapped in the spiral of seeking validation. You begin to trust your own inherent worth. You learn to say no without guilt. You stop searching for closure in another because you found closure within yourself. And once you reach that point, the narcissist has no doorway left into your life. But silence is more than just a boundary that protects you. It's a quiet reminder that triggers their collapse, because they know it's something they will never reach. They can imitate it, talk about healing, share philosophical quotes, but they cannot actually experience the peace that comes from within, because to achieve it, they'd have to face their own darkness, and that is something they will never do. Your silence, therefore, is what they hate most. It isn't loud, it isn't dramatic, yet it erodes them day by day. It forces them to see the truth. They have no power, they are no longer the center, and your life moves on without them. While you discover freedom, they are left only with a void nothing can fill. In the end, your silence is not merely the ending of a relationship, it is the death of an illusion. It is the final punctuation mark to a script the narcissist spent so long writing. It is the declaration that you have chosen freedom, and that your freedom does not need anyone's permission. That is why silence is the one thing they cannot endure, not because it distances you, but because it exposes the truth they fear most. They never had real power. They only borrowed it from your reactions. When a toxic cycle finally closes, the emptiness it leaves behind is rarely comfortable. After escaping the grip of a narcissist, many people fall into a state of disorientation, as if they've lost a vital piece of their life. And yet, out of that emptiness, something miraculous begins to take shape. You realize you are being reborn. No longer the version that was confined, manipulated, and defined by someone else. You become a new person, the one they never created, and the one they can never control. This rebirth does not arrive in a blazing instant. It often begins with small, quiet steps. You learn how to sleep through the night without waiting for a message. You learn how to smile while walking alone without feeling hollow. You learn to listen to your own emotions instead of letting them be dictated by storms outside of you. Each seemingly simple act becomes a piece of your resurrection. In psychology, this process can be called the restoration of the self. After enduring gaslighting, distraction, and the loss of your inner compass, you slowly reclaim ownership of your own mind. You realize that your thoughts, emotions, and values don't need anyone else's approval to be real. Rebirth means reclaiming mastery over your own life, the very thing the narcissist feared most. More importantly, this rebirth is not just recovery, it is transcendence. You don't return to who you were before because that earlier self was still vulnerable, still easily swayed by flattery or silence. Now you emerge stronger, clearer, with defined boundaries and the will to protect them. You become someone who can love without losing yourself, forgive without being exploited, connect without dependency. Rebirth also means reframing your painful experiences. Instead of seeing yourself solely as a victim, you begin to see yourself as a learner. The scars no longer symbolize weakness. They become sources of wisdom about humanity, about limits, about true worth. As Carl Jung once said, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. The manipulation, the betrayal, those very wounds become the raw material for awakening, for discovering what freedom really means. One of the clearest signs of rebirth is the ability to set boundaries. Once you may have said yes just to avoid conflict, or feared that saying no meant losing love. Now you know that a healthy relationship only exists with clear boundaries. You refuse what harms you. You protect your needs without guilt. And this ability is the most vivid proof that you've escaped the old script. What the narcissist hates most is not that you left them, it's that you live happily without them. When you find joy in the small things, when you build new relationships rooted in respect and sincerity, when you begin to truly love yourself, you prove a truth they can never bear. You no longer belong to them. Your existence no longer revolves around reflecting them, but around fulfilling your own purpose. Rebirth also means entering a new relationship with yourself. Instead of blaming yourself for wasted years, you learn to thank yourself for being strong enough to survive. Instead of condemning yourself for trusting too much, you see in that trust an open heart, a rare and precious quality once placed in the right hands. Instead of viewing the past as a string of failures, you see it as the training ground that shaped the wiser person you are today. Perhaps the most profound element of rebirth is the sense of freedom. Freedom is not doing whatever you want, it's living unbound by fear. You no longer fear abandonment because you know you already have yourself. You no longer fear judgment because you know your worth doesn't rest in anyone else's words. You no longer fear silence because silence now means listening to your own heart. In this rebirth, the narcissist has no place. They may try to return, to smear, to pretend they've changed, but none of it matters, because what they wanted was never you. It was power over you. And once you've stepped into freedom, that power is gone forever. Rebirth doesn't make you a seeker of revenge. It makes you living proof that inner freedom always triumphs over external control. You don't need to expose them because your peace is the loudest exposure. You don't need to prove you're right because the life you're building is proof enough. And so the story doesn't end with an explosion nor with a furious confrontation, but with stillness. You've left their stage, dropped their script. and begun to write a new chapter with your own pen. This new chapter doesn't include them, but it includes you, whole, clear, free. That is the ultimate victory, not because you defeated them, but because you rose beyond them. This rebirth is the one thing they will never forgive, because in their eyes you betrayed the role they assigned you. But in your eyes, it was not betrayal. It was a return to your true self. And once you've become the person they could never create, you step into a realm they can never reach. That is true freedom. The greatest reward after all you have endured. The journey through the earlier chapters has painted a complete picture of life with a narcissist. It begins with the illusion of love, drags on in a toxic cycle, and ends with the collapse of that very cycle once you awaken. But the most important point is not simply that you left. It's that you became the person they could never create. That transformation is what they can never forgive. In the narcissist's inner world, love is not connection, it is control. They don't love you as a free individual. They love only the version of you they can mold, accuse, and manipulate. They love only the reflection you provide, because through that reflection they feel real. As long as you react, cry, or chase after them, they hold power. But the moment you stop, the moment you fall silent, the cycle breaks, and from that moment on, they are no longer the director of the story, they are just a lost character in the very play they once scripted. Their reaction to this change is a whirlwind of chaos, confusion, rage, manipulation, smear campaigns, and finally despair. They may explode, return wearing the mask of someone changed, or cast you as the villain to save their image. But no matter what they do, one truth remains: they have lost control. And for someone whose existence depends on borrowed power, that is the heaviest sentence of all. Your silence becomes the strongest declaration. It doesn't come from anger or revenge, but from maturity and healing. Silence becomes a transparent mirror, exposing the truth that they only ever existed through your reactions. Silence becomes a sacred boundary, shielding you from the toxic cycle and handing you back your inner freedom. For you, silence is peace. For them, silence is crisis. Then comes the most vital moment, rebirth. You don't return to your old self. You become a stronger, clearer version who knows your worth. You learn to set boundaries, to live happily without proving anything, to love yourself without guilt. The painful past is no longer a scar to hide, but a lesson that shaped your growth. And while the narcissist remains trapped in their spiral of insecurity, you walk forward into true freedom, a freedom they can never reach. This ending has no dramatic explosion, no tearful farewell, no conclusion written by them. It closes with peace. You quietly leave the stage, abandon the role, and begin writing the next chapter of your life. That chapter doesn't include them, but it includes you, whole and free. That is the final truth the narcissist cannot endure. You no longer belong to them. You have proven that their power was only an illusion, that real love is not control, and that inner freedom is the ultimate strength. And when you live aligned with your true self, you win, not by defeating them, but by rising beyond them. In the end, this story isn't truly about the narcissist. It's about you, about the journey from darkness to light, from victim to author of your own life. It is proof that no matter how tightly one is bound, the human spirit can be reborn, and that rebirth requires no one's permission.